Sorry, obviously hadn't switched on recording as I anticipated. I hope we'll be able to squeeze in some time at the end for a bit of a wider discussion about the contents of this report, Capabilities for Transformative Change. So in a second, I'll go over the agenda for this webinar. We've got 90 minutes together and a vast amount of thoughts to share with you. We won't manage to cover everything that is in the report, but we hope to give you a flavour of its contents and through a number of breakout discussions and some activities, some slightly more embodied experience of what will be a slightly information heavy presentation, which is a little unusual for us. And we recognize, by the way, that people will come and go during these 90 minutes. Some of you will have to leave before the end. Some people will join a little later after the school run. But we are recording the meeting and we will, as I said, send it out to you along with the report at the beginning of next week. But before I begin, I think it's worth a moment of context for a document that focuses mostly on the capabilities we observed during our study for Joseph Rowntree Foundation last year on creating the enabling conditions for place-based community-led regeneration, and has the capability organization observed during our own work in the regenerative field for the past decade. We could speak for the next 90 minutes about the global context and emergent patterns, but let me just be a little brief because context is important. We can all probably see, if we're minded to listen to news, that the world is moving towards militarization in patterns that are very reminiscent of the conditions that appeared before World War One and Two, and rhetoric about World War Three is ramping up. We know from the Stockholm Resilience Centre that the speed at which we're eroding the conditions of planetary stability is increasing. We're seeing economic stagnation and degrowth, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is causing deep levels of anxiety. We're seeing cultural as well as political polarization in many different ways, from anti-woke narratives rolling back progress on diversity and inclusion to the rise of fear, anxiety, and division across issues such as mass migration. We're seeing the patterns and norms by which those of us who are a little older and that human systems, certainly in Western cultures, have lived for the past 100 years disappearing. And obviously, AI is fundamentally altering the landscape in which we communicate, work, and sense make. We're seeing a phenomenal rise in mental ill health, apathy, disengagement for civic and political life, a surveillance society that's increasing, the erosion of free speech. I could go on and we could completely depress ourselves. This is the gradual collapse of what we often describe as Horizon One, the dominant culture of social design of the day. But what we're not seeing, even for those of us who consistently work in it, is the rise, the visible rise of the third horizon, the regenerative future that aims to realign human economic and cultural systems to the principles that have sustained life on Earth for 3.8 billion years. It's long time work and it takes a bucket load of new capabilities and will, but it is where hope for the future lies. And whilst it may be challenging work, it's really hopeful work at a time when we sense that we really need to focus on the actively hopeful work that the late Joanna Macy spoke so articulately to. So today we hope to shed a little more light through this study on qualities and capabilities, excuse me, for place-based regeneration, on some of the very hopeful and effective work that is emerging. So let me share my screen. Hopefully this will work. We have had a large bout of sickness that has swept across really regenerative at the moment. So several of us are not here. And Joseph Rowntree also, who kindly sponsored this webinar, are also off sick and not with us. So please bear with me if our technical competencies are in fact not entirely what they should be. So I'm hoping you can all see my full screen now. Can I just check in with you that everybody can see my screen? Okay. So here's what's coming. Context for this report I've just slightly babbled on about. We have an opening exercise shortly. The webinar will be peppered with some breakout discussions so that you can make new connections and explore some of the topics we're talking about, and some live exercises that we'll all do together. And then we are going to go through the different categories of capabilities that we have identified. Capabilities to awaken and disrupt, heal and stabilize, strengthen and nurture relationship, weave and grow the future, and transform systems. And then I hope we'll have a lovely harvesting conversation and close the webinar for today. Please feel free to put anything into the chat, any questions you have. Neither Al or I will be monitoring the chat today, but we will certainly take a look at it, and there'll be plenty of opportunity for you to unmute yourselves and ask questions during the next 90 minutes. So for those of you that don't know us so well, just a little quick introduction to Really Regenerative. We're a community interest company, and we have 4 main fields of work. We are mainly a capability building organization through learning and development journeys. We deliver a lot of support for the place-based transformative programs and projects, often that emerge through our learning journeys, but also directly to municipalities, national parks, place-based organizations. Our own bioregional work in West Sussex, where we're based, and in the Azores, where we have established a regenerative learning centre, and we publish research provocations and publications which are designed to facilitate the move to the third horizon, the regenerative horizon, the future, the hopeful future that we are working towards, that you can see depicted, if you have never encountered it before, in Bill Sharp's 3 Horizons framework. So we are working towards shifting the existing dominant culture, which is no longer fit for purpose, towards the third horizon, the regenerative future. Just quickly, again, we have a wide range of people. I can see many of you that I know are already deep in regenerative work, and some who may be a little new to it. So what do we mean by regenerative ways of working? We really mean the work that is trying to align existing human, economic, and cultural systems to the first principles of living systems that have ensured the continuation of life on Earth for 3.8 billion years. That's a big mouthful, and we could spend a lot of time trying to explain that, but that's essentially what we mean. Holistic, working towards future potential rather than problem solving, working towards wholeness and integration of economy, ecology, and culture. And we do that across the fractals of place. And for us, they can range in human and ecological systems from the bioregional level, which is the largest scale that we work at, all the way down to the neighborhood level. So today, here, people that have worked on this project are myself, Dr. Al Mathers, who will introduce herself, who's co-presenting with me today, Josie Warden, who alas is not with us today due to illness of her young son, and a shout out to Niels de Vischer, who has worked with us on 2 reports now, to whom we're endlessly grateful for his amazing way to bring illustrations to our often convoluted and complex work. And he worked with us on our first report for Joseph Rowntree Foundation last year, and this one. Okay, this is a slightly simplified version of the 3 horizons. It's the X curve that some of you may have come across. that looks at how different capabilities and different actions contribute to hospicing the current economic and cultural systems that we have, which is described as breakdown dynamics, and the regenerative future, which describes how we design and create build-up dynamics that can scale up and integrate successful regenerative practices. And all of the capabilities that we highlight in this report, do quite possibly stretch across both hospicing existing systems and disruptive systems and contribute to building up. Some of them also contribute on an individual level, some on a relational level, and some on a systemic level. And we'll try to be as clear about those as we can as we go through the report. So we are going to start exploring the report by going to what you'll see in the report as the third section in the report, because it's quite possibly the most significant section of the whole report. And it is traditionally the way in which something that we at Really Regenerative and the regenerative field really is prioritizing, which we describe in some simplicity as relationship before task. So the capabilities and qualities that strengthen and nurture right relationship, that are ways of shaping social infrastructure and social movement to a certain extent. And it is showing up possibly as the single most powerful capability for transformative change. That to stay in right relationship through the complexities of unraveling systems and norms in times of radical uncertainty. A very dear mentor of mine, Peter Block, some of you may know his work, often says, what if relationship is the work? What if that is the work of regeneration first and foremost? So in this section of the report, we look at 6 different aspects of strengthening and nurturing relationship. Being in right relationship, what it means to be in right relationship to all life, not just to each other in terms of human context. Something that Margaret Wheatley used to refer to as conversational leadership. How to and why to prioritize relationship as a common good. Something that we had seen as critical, the outward manifestation of inner integrity as a capability that many really effective leaders of transformative change are demonstrating. The importance of participatory process and inquiry-led work, and the capability that is harmonizing and reconciling paradox, complexity, and tension. Those that you see in red on the screen are the ones that we are going to highlight in this short webinar, because we just simply cannot stuff everything into 90 minutes. And we hope that we have picked ones that will resonate and be of interest to you. So I'm going to invite Al now to take over and start us off with a relational breakout exercise. That is the way that we start all of our own learning journeys. Al, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Jenny. So yes, as Jenny was saying, all of Power of Place and the wider learning journeys that Really Regenerative leads start with this focus on relationship before task. So at this point, we'd like everyone, invite everyone to really focus on what that means for you today. So we will be going out into breakouts in groups of 3 shortly, and there are 2 questions that you'll be exploring in those groups. The first is, what brought you here today and why is this of interest to you? And then to reflect on what is the crossroads you're at in terms of your own capabilities for transformative change. As these breakouts are very short, we suggest that you don't really focus on the traditional introductions, job titles, organizations, but it's really being very present with these questions. And in your groups of three, we invite everyone to rotate around these roles of speaker, observer, and resource. So giving a chance to really share and reflect on your own understanding of these questions at this point in your life, to observe what comes through, and then to also stimulate that discussion as a resource. So I think Sam is going to now open breakout rooms for everyone, if that's okay, Sam.
Thanks, Sam. If you're ready, Sam has stepped in to help us out today, who was attending the webinar. So thanks, Sam, very much for stepping in as we all go down with slight sickness this week.
They're all open. Hopefully, everybody's got a message on their screen.
Okay, so we'll see you back here in 9 minutes. Al.
Okay, so yeah, welcome back from our kind of first wake up exercise. It would be lovely if you were able just to pop in the chat some just immediate reflections about what struck you about that experience. What did it make? What did it provoke for you? And we'll just see what comes in from that as we go through. The intention of having a breakout at this point is to create the intentional time to really remove us from the kind of noise that surrounds us in our daily life and get us to really focus on what is our purpose when we enter these spaces? What are we bringing and what do we want to create from them? So there's some lovely reflections coming in. Everyone's looking for community in this space and lots of crossroads for work and values, the power of collective imagination. And so as we move through this, we're already seeing that that point around relationships and connection is really present for many people. So just coming into what does prioritizing relationship as common good really mean? I think it's moving from that idea of this being an exception to being this as an ongoing commitment and practice and pattern for common good. And in order to do this well, we have to, first of all, live the questions. And that means being in that continual place of constant inquiry, that actually the answers at this time are not as powerful as what we actually need to think about what could that potential be? How could we build it? And therefore, by focusing on intentionally constant inquiry, then we live those questions in our daily lives and our work throughout. What we have found through the work is that deep and horizontal is incredibly important. And so that actually that collective production at the scale of small groups can be really a powerful catalyst for systemic and wider change. And thirdly, the idea of deep listening. We're in a time where actually shouting louder and shouting over people has reducing returns, and we know that it's exhausting for everyone. So the power of deep listening comes very much to the fore when we're thinking about being in right relationship with one another. Next page. Thanks, Jenny. So one of the programs that Really Regenerative has been involved in, where this showed up really throughout at a number of scales, has been the Desire program, which was a new European Bauhaus Lighthouse program carried out with partners across 8 different European cities. And whilst we were looking at introducing living systems principles across the consortium of 22 organisations, the focus on prioritising building relationships came to the fore through our work with Kollenberg in Denmark, but also at the scale of what it meant for core teams, what it meant for citizens, and also at that scale of collaboration across the landscape. Themes again that we found through this work was that in focusing on right relationship, deep is better than fast, small is better than scale, and that it's always critical to travel at the speed of trust. Jenny, do you want to go to the next slide? One of the capabilities that comes through, and really I suppose is a supporting structure within that, is that focus on participatory practice. And that's a route to really building relationships that focus and centre on trust and reciprocity. So as we go through, we think about prioritising participatory process and inquiry as a tool for relational collaborative design. And it's a constant state of mind. So it destroys the idea of hierarchy, it destroys the idea of separation, and induces a humbleness into not knowing, and ensuring that we stay in that point of question and active inquiry. So through our work in Desire, we saw that as a way that actually those relationships flourished and prospered and grew around community and trust. They slowed down reactive ways of working and enabled more thoughtful, reflective practice to grow amongst the convening of stakeholders, and particularly when people were new to working with regenerative practice. Participatory practice doesn't stand alone. It is actually embedded within more deeply regenerative work. So it is a tool there to help with developmental learning, to, as I was saying, reduce the idea of separation and build regenerative capacity, so that actually that works on a number of scales, both on how individuals grow, but also for building collective potential. That idea of nested scale is obviously ever present throughout regenerative work, and we can see how this showed up across Desire in terms of when we focus on self and we work from inquiry, it's about developing a living systems mindset. We also saw it when we held spaces and worked collectively, so it allowed those spaces to be spaces for curiosity, unpicking and understanding complexity together, and exploring areas that maybe had not become visible previously. It also works at the systemic level, where it's a process to both respond to complexity and increase reflective creativity and vision. Just on this page, we've given a number of the projects that actually really kind of exemplify some of these kind of practices and priorities. So in terms of the work of Atelier Lume, working on transforming bioregional materials through creative atelier over 12 years. Dark Matter Labs, where multidisciplinary teams have been brought together to reimagine civics. And we saw it across the whole Desire programme in terms of being able to really work as a collective across geographic boundaries to discover new insights that focused on what it meant for belonging, relationships, irresistibility and creating trust. And I'll pass back to Jenny at that point.
And one of the other projects, I think, in which the commitment to participatory process and developmental work was exemplified, that we spoke to at length, was Regen, for those of you from Australia, was Regen Melbourne's Swimmable Birrarung project, bringing multi-stakeholder, multidisciplinary field together to bring life back to the main river system. There are many, many more that we spoke to that we could highlight, but the importance, I think, was the capabilities of people to include participatory process and to include developmental processes. And that made all of the difference to these 4 projects, both on an individual, community, and embedded systemic level. Another really deep and complex set of capabilities and qualities that we saw that enable right relationship are what we describe as harmonizing and reconciling work. I saw many of you in the chat mention paradoxes, mention polarities and tensions. And the ability to design for harmonizing and reconciling processes showed up across all continents and all different types of projects that we looked at. There is an enormously long list of capabilities that sits underneath that. But some of those that were really particularly important that showed up with Resilience Earth in Catalonia is understanding and enabling the difference between forming networks and helping them to become collaborative ecosystems that work together, which is exemplified by the work of Regen Earth in Catalonia. To be able to deeply value diversity in community landscape and even in governance frameworks, to actually be able to, in project design, bring in evolutionary governance, again, was a really strongly enabling capability. And we've spoken about participatory process, but the design to enable ownership and to create empowerment of participants showed up really strongly. Practices like deep democracy training, peacemaking practice, nonviolent communication were present across many different fields. Using frameworks, reconciling frameworks, something developed originally by somebody called J.G. Bennett, used by the late Carol Sanford and Regenesis Practice International Center for Practice, Regenerative Practice, I can never say that. Intersectionality, the ability to convene and put attention on and bring in diverse voices in community and decision-making process all showed up really, really strongly. Three really good examples: Resilience Earth in Catalonia that I've mentioned, who are part of a really strong ecosystem across the rurality of Catalonia, that works on ecology, economy, and culture, that works on healing the story of separation, bioregional weaving labs, who again are bringing really deep, diverse community together, working on landscape and governance frameworks across many different territories. And again, Resilience Earth, whose founders are all really deeply trained in reconciling processes, deep democracy, and used John T. Lederach's process of critical use to bring in real outliers, real edge practitioners for change into systems as usual to be the catalyst for change in their work. Was a really interesting organization, if you have not come across it, to connect to and study. Something else that showed up as really important in many of the founders of regenerative projects, or I'm always nervous of the word leaders because it is a very loaded word, was the ability to embody and manifest in a integrity and right relationship as individuals, but also within the projects that they designed. So we saw a deep ability to be able to integrate all life, just not human life, and to embody living systems integrity through really deeply radical inclusion at a simple level of people that you don't like and don't agree with and don't understand, but also to always bring non-human life, interspecies communication into the work. Something that underpinned that outward manifestation of inner integrity was frequently a clear and commitment and sense of purpose, something that we describe as a promise beyond ableness. A commitment to working on something that you know will require you to develop as an individual and to build new capability. And they had a particular sense of something that the late Carol Sanford named to me as imperturbability, that promise beyond ableness whilst maintaining adaptability and flexibility, allowed them not to be swayed by the shadow values that rise as systems fragment of anger, fear, scarcity, or competitiveness. Again, things that they shared, practices and studies that they shared: deep democracy, solo quests, time alone in nature, regular reflective practice. Most people that we saw had dialogue practices like way of counsel, Socratic Bohemian dialogue, art of hosting, presencing, and sometimes even physical presencing practice like social presencing theatre that some of you may have encountered in ULab. One of the case studies that we looked at, or the organizations that we looked at, and I think there's maybe somebody on the call, was the Monviso Institute in Italy, that really integrates this well across the level of self, the work that they do in community in Monviso, and the things that they teach through their learning journeys through ETH Zurich and at Monviso. So they are building regenerative capacity through learning and training. They are also working particularly with anticipating crises as triggers of new opportunities. And we'll look at that a little bit more when we come to shamans of shock later on in the presentation. But they are bringing people as they learn to actually build the community site in northern Italy, designing buildings that perform like forests. So they are really deeply embodying in the way in which they work living systems integrity across the board. And that is something that we have found to be a very powerful capability to do. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the first section, which it was capabilities for relationship. And I realize we're going quite fast, but time is going to tick rapidly through. So that brings us to what is the first section in the report, that is capabilities that awaken and disrupt. And those are largely for those of us who are working within the dominant or disruptive horizons, the first and second horizons, or culture as usual, and trying to bring it forwards into the regenerative world, but also at a very, very personal level to ensure that we stay primed, that we stay awake, that we stay present to regenerative design in the face of the power of the culture that we are working in. So there were 6 sections in this publication too, and we're going to focus on 2, deveiling for sense making and storytelling the emergent future. And by all means, come back to us when you read the full report. We may also host further webinars that focus on each one of these qualities at a later date. So what was noticeable across these, that they are applicable on both curves of the X curve, hospicing and creating the regenerative culture, and that there are 3 aspects to it. There's the process of awakening, which is about discovery, learning, and capability building. There's a process that is about disrupting the status quo in order to provoke that desire for discovery and learning. And then there's that process about continuing as a regenerative practitioner to ensure that we're awake to our own capabilities and continue to seek to disrupt ourselves. I'm going to skip over this one because I'm really mindful of time and go to deveiling for sense making. So what do we mean by deveiling? Sense making in complexity needs people who can deveil invisible systems dynamics, power dynamics, to help us make sense of what is really happening. And that is becoming rapidly more and more important, particularly with the influence of AI. So some of the practices and skills we saw are complex and challenging to understand, but hopefully we can try to give you a good example. So somehow being able to weave different strands of thinking and knowledge together and demonstrate the interconnections between them. I started off today by talking about multiple different aspects of systems fracturing and collapse, which might look as if they are disparate and different, but are in fact wholly connected and wholly related to each other. It is an ability that we could see that people have that are able to make the invisible visible. So to reveal hidden or overlooked aspects of the world, to be able to create provocations and host inquiries about the critical questions of our time, which we've talked about the power of questions. Again, to be able to use developmental frameworks to deconstruct those hidden dynamics. And we also saw a lot of people having a really deep and strong capability to visualize the microscopic or to bring visual and arts and cultural practice through to engender ongoing awe and relationship to nature. And one of the reasons that we partner with Niels is for his capability to deveil through visual material that subconsciously and consciously makes understanding the complex more powerful, because visual material reaches many of us far more than these words on a page. Here are some of the many, I talked about frameworks, the many different frameworks that are very useful in deveiling and sense making. One on the left that you can see is one of the illustrations we use of something that is commonly described as a story of separation. How did we get to a point where humans feel separated from nature? All of the different ways in which we separate ourselves and divide ourselves, humans between humans. You can also see Carol Sanford's 7 core living systems principles that we design with a lot, the 3 horizons that you have met, I'm sure, before, the planetary boundaries framework, and several others. These are routinely now used in regenerative practice by practitioners who are helping folk to understand the complex dynamics that are happening in front of them. Dark Matter Labs, for example, is very good at producing publications that deveil potential, that deveil dynamics. Their paper for Europe's built environment that was produced with the Desire Project that Al showed about is a good example of that. But more creatively, Next Agency, you can see a very transparent bubble in the image. Using art and culture to disrupt, it brought a new character into society, the garden caretaker, that was placed on the outside of ongoing development, social housing build, so that people passing by could interact with nature through arts-based practice to explore whether that interaction with nature would enable them to have a longer connection to the place as they moved into the social housing. Luma and Al spoke about being able over a long period of time to through demonstrating and redesigning the buildings in that place, how undervalued resources in the Camargue could become a new biomaterials-based economy. And then there are many narrative examples. Nate Hagens, who I'm sure many of you follow, his great simplification podcast and vlog. Now, what we want to do is give you another breakout example of how frameworks can deveil and disrupt and be opportunities for us to develop and learn. So in front of you on the screen, you can see a framework which is called the Culture Tetrad, developed by the late Carol Sanford, which we use at Really Regenerative a lot to explore four aspects of hidden dynamics: status, rituals, taboos, and totems. So I'm going to briefly say something to what each is, and then we're going to invite you into a breakout to explore how these show up in your workplace, in your place where you live, in the culture or the bioregion in which you are living and working. So the first, status, what we give status to determines the distribution of power based on a shared belief as to where power will do the most good. And I'm going to pick the unfortunate example of US culture. I wish I hadn't turned on the news this morning, but there's never any good news on the BBC. So in the US, what has traditionally been given status to is white, male, achievement, power, money, visible visible progress towards huge economic wealth. What is given status to in Really Regenerative, for example, is the power of relationship. Rituals are recurring intentional events which help keep cultural symbols and values alive and sacred. We started off this webinar with something that is a relational ritual to break out and give people an opportunity to connect using a key question to explore together. Totems are things that are material representation of history, of cosmology, of future potential of a place and people, which is something unifying. Sometimes they're good and sometimes they're not, but a really good example of a totem is Notre Dame in Paris. I was hosting a workshop in the Netherlands when Notre Dame caught fire and burned down, and there were a couple of French people in that group, and it was extremely powerful to see what that totemic building embodied for them about the spirit of France and how meaningful it was to them, and therefore how very quickly the state stepped in and funded its restoration. So in many ways, a totem can embody the spirit and the aspiration and the future of people. But it can also be something that is non-regenerative and degenerative and holds us locked in other different types of culture. And we can all pick up symbology from the past, the emblemic things like the Nazi insignia that are totemic in a different way. And then there are taboos. Taboos are really interesting to work with in a group, and these are capabilities that we saw across the board in people that we spoke to that were able to design and host discussions using frameworks like this to unpick stuck culture in particular and enable it to move towards a regenerative space. So taboos, for example, at a very simple level, can be something like not being allowed to criticize a boss in the workplace, at the same time as stating you have a determined culture of transparency. So let's try. Again, this will be a very short breakout. There are 4 questions. When you get out into your groups of 3s for a 6-minute discussion, pick one of these questions and have a little explore together and see what the experience is like. What is given status to where you work that doesn't create regenerative culture, and what could you change? Or what rituals do you have in your life that help you reconnect, didn't spell that right, to something that's larger and more significant than you, like a promise beyond ableness? What's taboo in the organization or place or community in which you work? And how does that taboo affect the culture of the organization? And what is the totem of place that you can see in your place? Does it express the future potential, and what role might it play in the future? And if it doesn't, what might? Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll copy and paste all of those questions into the chat. But Sam, if you're ready, we can go out and have another exploratory chat together.
Rooms are open.
Okay. Oh, you've put it in. Sorry, I was just about to do it. Going to get we are definitely not going to get through everything that we had scheduled for this webinar, and realized that last time we made it 2 hours and not 90 minutes. But even in 2 hours, I'm not sure we would get through everything. So I'm going to ask you that following that very brief conversation to drop anything into the chat about what you observed yourself about those 4 different aspects of culture, and how useful you might find or did find discussions about them for lifting up things that you may not have hitherto considered or seen. But I am going to skip forward in the report to the 4th section, which is capabilities and qualities that weave and grow the future. That again, in many different fractals of place, many different geographies, many different systemic fields, we saw a growing capability and importance to be able to connect and scale link ecosystems across the fractals of place. And there were 3 aspects that we have written about: convening fields of energy, weaving and connecting across fields, and then something very particular about being able to harness pioneer courage and commitment that we won't get to today. But I want to touch on the capability that we saw about calling forth, as Joanna Macy used to describe it, fields of energy. And fields of energy are one of the real underlying conditions that make it possible to transform a whole system, particularly through nodal interventions. And we saw a number of different, not just capabilities, but approaches to doing that. Convening participatory conference, which is designed to show the contributory efforts of all parts of a field and explore common cause, was a frequent process that we saw used. Organizing participatory learning journeys in which multidisciplinary and multi-system representatives could explore each other's work and the way in which they worked. The capabilities to map and understand the field of energy, again through participatory events or deep storytelling, and the real importance of systemic constellations work. One of the ways in which we mapped and saw systems integrating and coming together was across the very many different fields of energy that are converging into the regenerative field of work. So we could see permaculturists, regenerative agriculture practitioners, food and farming and landscape design coming together as fields. We could see separate organizations that were focused on creating land trust, the land trust movement, rights for land, sometimes even ecocide, again, coming together and working together in collaborative fields. We could see the social justice movements, restorative justice, decolonization dialogues, all coming together and meeting and being brought together to have different types of dialogue. We could see new civics, new economics, new governance experiments, co-living, sociocracy, community guilds, ecocide activism, which are all essentially born as separate systems coming together and working together. And we can see evidence of fields coming together and being brought together by field conveners across finance. So bioregional financing facilities, patient capital, ownership innovation through blockchain, cryptocurrencies, or however well not well they may not work, and even now through AI innovation. And we could also see other movements that were starting to move into the regenerative field. Things that were born like donor economics activation labs, originally without regeneration in its narrative, moving into the regenerative space alongside biomimicry. So we are seeing individuals and capabilities that are able to bring multiple disparate fields together in integrated islands of coherence. And that is a real important ability and an important thing to be happening. So some of the things that we saw emerge from that TransCap initiative, for example, that some of you may have come across, which is a collaborative innovation space trying to build the field of systemic investing. The new European Bauhaus that was Ursula von der Leyen's brainchild is moving into a movement that is connecting architecture, urban planning, culture, community, and has actually created through its experiments a field of what we would describe as social mediators. And the whole of the bioregional field that is beginning to come together. Bioregional Weaving Labs in Europe, R3.0's Bioregional Conference program and conference that's happening right now. Joe Brewer's Designing Bioregional Learning Centres community, the Bioregional Knowledge Group in Europe, BioRefi, that are different parts of the bioregional field that are coming together to collaborate to bring more energy, capability, and possibility to their fields of work. And weaving is probably, in System as Usual, the most underrated, under-recognized, and highly skilled practice in the regenerative field. And I'm listing there some of the things and the capabilities that we saw in people that are able to do this work. Highly systems and pattern literate, often very polymathic people, absolutely able to broker connections, dialogue, engage different parts of different contributors to the field, really good at creating and nurturing very unexpected alliance, bringing people together, deep ability to understand all perspectives of each field being addressed, but without ever collapsing into agreement, and really acting as strange attractors, magnetizing fields and movement together to nurture collaboration and trust. And in many ways, often systemic storytellers at multiple different levels. Really good at facilitating meaningful conversations, able to hold vast bodies of knowledge easily, and something that is really particular, able to sense into the right moment that any individual group needs to elevate effort, connecting individuals together when they're ready for each other's intelligence and capability, and deep senses of evolutionary potential, of where a system might be about to shift and where it could move next. And we saw that across this study, both in individuals and in projects. Many of you may know Daniel Christian Wahl. He's most famous as an author and speaker, but he is a real deep weaver across Mallorca and the Balearic Islands, bringing many different actors across those islands together to work both on land and on ocean. people like Ross Hall, Noah Lodison, the Weaving Lab that they founded together, people like Indy Johar, Cassie Robinson, Mila Aliana, who is sadly sick today and works with us. But within projects like Joseph Rowntree, for example, their Foundation Pathfinders Group, Transition Together Networks, Dark Matter Labs again, Bioregional Weaving Labs, there are many of these types of organizations creating weaving projects that are bringing multi-stakeholder communities together in transformative change. In section 5, we talk about capabilities that transform futures. These are perhaps the most alchemical type of hard to describe and hard to quantify capabilities, but I'm going to give it a go in the last few minutes. So there are, again, 6 different areas of capability: evolutionary system design, process design, something that we describe as magicians of multiplicity, that I'll close on today, but it's incredibly hard to describe. But let's start with evolutionary system design. And I suppose the strongest thing that we noticed is, if you want to create transformative system effect, those people that are doing it well and most effectively really have a deep understanding of evolutionary potential. So what do we mean by evolutionary systems design? 2 really important capabilities to be able to bridge tangible action and the intangible alchemy of change. The practical ability to map systems and understand the dynamic and entangled relationships, and the ability to integrate 3 strands of work: ecology, economy, and culture, into transformative initiatives at the same time. We saw very little of that, but we did see it. But the most important thing was that people that were holding the potential of the integration of economy, ecology, and culture, even if they were starting with ecology or starting with economy and culture. Evolutionary process design, I want to share 2 really important examples with you. One is Regen Melbourne in Australia, and one is Haifa and Scoop in Jersey, which is in the Channel Islands in the UK. So though many of you from Australia, I know, that are on here will know the work of Regen Melbourne. And if there is anyone from Regen Melbourne, unmute yourself and speak up, because I'll be telling your story and it would be much better if you did. But Regen Melbourne was born, like many things, out of systemic shock. So 2 systemic shocks in the case of Regen Melbourne: the fires of the summer of 2019, which were rapidly followed up by the global outbreak of the COVID pandemic. And what Regen Melbourne did is bring a group of people together in lockdown to reimagine and rethink Melbourne. And over the years of being in dialogue with Kai and watching the work and studying the work of Regen Melbourne, what we have seen emerge is a real capability at evolutionary process design. So let me share our obviously biased view of what it is, how it is we think they go about their work, because it's very adaptive and it's very place contextual. And it always starts with mapping critical stakeholders and engaging in one-to-one deep inquiry to prime the system and build relationships of trust, always seeking to understand the dynamic of the field. It then convenes that system in dialogue and an innovation forum to explore initial findings and insights of a particular issue and create an opportunity for building deeper co-mutual collaborative relationships. It then will publish a report that delivers authority and strategy around building a different future, and then create systemic pilot activities to experiment with and activate place-based systems evolution that are supported with learning systems laboratories and shaped around an Earthshot narrative. And you can see some of those on the screen, I hope. that they have been working on. Swimmable Birrarung that I talked about earlier, which is not just about creating a healthy river that runs through a key city. It's about working with upstream agriculture. It's about working with community cohesion. It's about working with environmental health. 300,000 streets is about a promise beyond ableness to find a way to create community cohesion, environmental change and improvement in ecological restoration and economy across every single street in Greater Melbourne. And the 15-minute cornucopias are a food system initiative that brings multi-stakeholder groups together. This looks as if it might be experimental and evolutionary, and it has been. But this is an evolutionary process design that is contextual for a large city in Australia, and it works, or is working. And it's really valuable to study and understand the different way in which a process design is culturally and place-based and contextual. Because this would not necessarily work in another city, but it works in the cultural context of Melbourne. And that capability is really, really important. The second one I want to share with you is on the island of Jersey, and is two organizations that were founded by a very brilliant individual called India Hamilton, that are Scoop and Haifa. Scoop is a sustainable food cooperative that was launched to address a challenge of there not being high nutrient dense, high quality, regeneratively produced food on the island of Jersey. But it was a response to India's mapping of the food system on the island and seeing where the critical blocks to accessing high nutrient density, high quality food for the health of the people of Jersey were. And it was created as a cultural initiative, as an economic initiative, as an environmental initiative, to give space for the very few organic food and regenerative food producers on the island to get their produce to market, which they didn't have. At the same time, it offered cultural opportunities to bring different types of chef, to encourage foraging, and to get the attention of the Jersey government to invest and to create different types of policy to support the growth of organic and regenerative agriculture on the island. And it was very successful. Haifa, as a consultancy, was born out of that to develop those initiatives forward. And one of the initiatives that built on that is that you see in the picture that you see in front of me is called Regen Gathering, that convenes experts, farmers, food system experts every single year. It's just happened over the previous weekend. It happens once a year. That builds further capability, understanding, and knowledge. So Haifa's process, here you can see the Haifa kitchen, that at the top you can see some images from the gathering, the 2-day gathering called Regen Gathering that Haifa designs and hosts. A third gathering called Luminaries that has then brought the finance system into the food system on Jersey, was launched at the beginning of last year. So what is their process? Their evolution again starts with mapping to understand the structural barriers to change. Then creating lighthouse activities, very similar to Desire that I spoke about before, to break down those barriers to change that act as demonstrators of future potential, to lift up people's sense of possibility, hope, and courage. That engage with existing systems by demonstrating viability of something different. Develop support services that support transformative change, like funding, like being able to provide food systems to schools, food products to schools, and then convening whole systemic fields in learning processes, usually a conference that blends external expertise, the local field, and experimental edges. And then finally, creating funded innovation initiatives to underpin supply chain mindset and the approach where needed. This has been an 8-year process on Jersey to do this. But it is, again, place-based, culturally contextual. Jersey's culture really still venerates expertise. So the importance of creating regen gathering by bringing in external experts at this stage, which might feel alien in regenerative culture, has been the right thing to do there. Okay, magicians of multiplicity. I just want to say 2 things about this. Multiplicity is developing exponential powers of understanding. And again, the most effective regenerative designers and practitioners we saw were working on and developing these exponential powers of understanding. And I can only describe it as being able to experience and design as a living system. To be able to look at a city and see it in constant living dynamic evolution and motion and anticipate the direction in which it might move in response to critical interventions. It is a capacity that is dependent on pattern literacy, systems understanding, but also has a very alchemical quality that is developed by working on some of the earlier relational and embodiment practices that, alas, I didn't get to talk about. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and spotlight myself and bring you all back into the room for the last 3 minutes that we have on the schedule here. I haven't been able to cover a huge amount of what we planned to talk about. And I've gone like a bullet train through some of the information that is in the report. So I just want to invite any of you to unpop and share any reflections that you have whilst we're in this small group. And to also ask a question is, would you find it valuable if we scheduled another one where we had a little more time to go through? Yes, I'm seeing a lot of nodding. My timing and my overstuffing is legendary with those who know me. And now some of you know a little bit more how much I try to stuff into 90 minutes and fail miserably to do. So any reflections from you other than, oh, my head's spinning? Could you stop talking? Anybody, please feel free in this small and intimate group where you have had an opportunity to pop out and meet each other. Ah, Niels, hello, I didn't see you there. I just want to highlight Niels again. Any reflections that you would like to share? Be brave. Oh, I can see a
Wanted
room.
to say, Jenny, thanks so much. Really wonderful. What was coming to my mind with the weavers that we work with here in Australia is that capacity to help them make what they're doing visible.
Yeah.
So
I missed the story
our-
behind it. Sorry.
no, well that's okay, but it's how do we help each other and see our own processes and make it more visible. So I think that's my main comment.
Yeah, that deveiling thing is very powerful, I think.
Yeah, and seeing the evolutionary design or not, or how might we, that aspect.
Thanks very much. Anything else? Yeah, I can see there are some things going into the chat. Then very lastly and very briefly, I'll share that we have designed a short learning journey called Leading from Place this autumn that starts on the 22nd of December, where we will be more deeply exploring everything that is in this report. If you would like to join us, I'll share more details of that when I share the recording. And finally, I'd really just like to say a word of thanks to Joseph Rowntree Foundation, who funded the time to go through 10, 12 years of work that we've done, all of the interviews that we did for the report that we published last year for them. As I'm sure many of you know, funding is hard to come by, and we wouldn't have been able to spend the time to do this work without their support. And they're one of the organisations, certainly in the UK, that is really supporting the emergence of the regenerative field, but really mostly all of you, all of the people and the organizations and the places that we've been privileged to work with who've generously shared their knowledge and their wisdom. A lot of the things in the report come from my never to be published book, Places for Life, as well as our study for Joseph Rowntree Foundation, because it has now grown like a rainforest to 500,000 words, and the publisher asked for 60. And I have no time to edit it, but I've managed to put some of the insights over the last 10, 12 years into this report, and I hope they'll be helpful. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm sorry we didn't manage to get through absolutely everything. I'm loving the fact, Jay Lloyd, that there are 3 people in your room. Nice to see you all, and thank you so much for coming. We'll share the report and the recording with you, and also you'll be able to access the US recording, which we're now going to extend to 2 hours instead of 90 minutes, I think, and let people know. Thank you again. I hope you found some of it helpful and useful, and we hope to see you again in the future. Thanks very much.